Whitney Houston was by far the greatest singer of her time, and perhaps of all time. But the dichotomy between her clean-cut public image and her real self fought a bloody battle, one which ultimately was victorious over the other. In this Pink Pill Autopsy, we will explore the carefully curated persona of Whitney Houston's early years and her deterioration into a drug-fueled chaos that cost her her career, her marriage, her health, her legendary voice, and ultimately her life. One might ask, why such a beautiful and talented woman with all the opportunities of fame, wealth, and the ability to pick virtually any man in the world to marry made the choices she made? In this case, the perception was by far a better option than her reality. Whitney Houston was born on August 8, 1963, and briefly lived in the projects until race riots broke out in 1967, when her parents, John and Cissy Houston, along with her two brothers, Michael and Gary, moved to a safer middle-class neighborhood. Skinny, sporting a short afro but undeniably beautiful, Whitney was often teased as a teenager, but her brothers and friend, Robin Crawford, fiercely defended her. Crawford would go on to be an integral part of Whitney's personal and professional life and the source of rumors challenging Whitney's sexuality. Whitney knew at 5 years old that she wanted to be a professional singer, but got her start in the limelight as a model and was the first Black woman to land on the cover of 17 magazine. All the while, Whitney's mother, gospel and backup singer Cissy Houston, worked to cultivate her voice.
Sometimes it feels like me and you against the world, and for all the times I cry.
Through her mother's connections in the industry, Whitney was soon discovered by the legendary Clive Davis of Arista Records, who had cultivated the careers of Aretha Franklin and Bruce Springsteen. Whitney's mentorship by Davis created a fundamental dichotomy in what became her two selves: the all-American goody-two-shoes girl next door, and the Jersey girl who was drawn to the hood underbelly of some aspects of Black culture. Clive Davis curated every aspect of Whitney's image: her speech, body language, wardrobe, public appearances, and chose every song on her debut 1986 album, Whitney Houston. He wanted Whitney to cross over from just an R&B singer. He was determined to sell her image to a wider and wider audience as a pop singer. The calculation worked. Whitney's first and second album were the highest selling of all time, bumping the Beatles out of the top spot. But not everyone was happy with Whitney's white girl dipped in chocolate public persona. During the announcement of her nomination for the Soul Train Music Awards in 1989, Black people could be heard booing and heckling her in the audience. They called her an Oreo.
Whitney Houston, I want to dance with somebody.
Al Sharpton called her Whitey instead of Whitney. Some R&B radio stations refused to play her music despite her selling millions of records globally. One cannot discount the deeply painful effect tribal shaming has, particularly when it comes to Black women, who are often put in the position to uphold Blackness and behave in the ways the community sanctions. Perhaps all that shaming led her to tap back into the behaviors that she was more comfortable with, like getting high on cocaine with her two brothers and ultimately anchoring herself to the sinking ship of a marriage to bad boy Bobby Brown, whom ironically she met that fateful night at the Soul Train Music Awards. Maybe it was her way of pleading to the Black community that she was still one of them. Bobby Brown was a well-known drug addict who often had very public brushes with the law. Many of her fans, including me, were bewildered by the intense draw she had toward him. Why would such a beautiful, talented woman, adored by the entire world with her pick of virtually any man to marry, would pick this one was confounding. The carefully crafted good girl persona began to slip, and she shed that cloak to swim in the same pool with Bobby. Not because he had corrupted her like many of us at the time thought, but because it was where she felt the most comfortable. But psychologists warn that what humans deem comfortable or familiar aren't necessarily healthy. Whitney's marriage to Bobby Brown in 1992 began her descent from global pop icon to tragic figure who lost herself to drugs and dysfunction, which first cost her God-given angelic singing voice and ultimately her life. In his book, Is Marriage for White People?, Professor Ralph Richard Banks wrote that who you choose to marry is the single most important decision you can make. Whitney may have been bisexual, but in the end, she chose to marry a man. Out of all the men in the world, she chose one who would encourage the most destructive parts of herself and procreate with a man who would condone the use of crack cocaine in front of their daughter. So what's the lesson here? As we continue to have these conversations in this sector about leveling up our outward appearance, as Clive Davis did with Whitney, we can't ignore that true and lasting transformation comes from the inside. Changing your hair, makeup, body language, and speech patterns like Whitney will only temporarily cloak your true self, which will patiently wait to reemerge when the time feels right. If your personal history is filled with abuse, neglect, and parental dysfunction, what seems most comfortable for you won't be the most beneficial for you. Living a healthy and functional existence may seem as foreign to you as living on Mars. That's why it's important not to just focus on the shell of your public self, but work to actually become that idealized self through deprogramming, self-evaluation, therapy, and a supportive and healthy support circle. Perhaps if Whitney had done the internal work to become the idealized persona that she presented to the world, we would have still been blessed to have her living her best life amongst all of us. My question to all of you listening: do you find yourself being too laser focused on the veneer of outward femininity and sophistication and are neglecting or rejecting the necessary but painful work to make over who you really are inside? Perhaps it's time to stop faking it till you make it. Fake it until you become it. I'm Crystalline Karazin, and you've just taken the pink pill.